Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. Just at the beginning, if you remember, on Saturday, I told you that on Monday, I'm going to interview the Lebanese journalist Ghadi Francis. It's my fault. It is on Tuesday, it's not on Monday. Sometimes I am very confused about my own schedule and I forget the correct dates. However, the interview is already scheduled. The live streaming is already scheduled, as you can see on YouTube and on Rumble. And we are going to do the interview tomorrow with Radi Francis at 5 p.m. Central European Time. It is 4 p.m. GMT. Today's video is mostly about Al Jazeera's bureau chief in Gaza, Wael Dahdouh, who lost most of his family members since October 7 because Israel targeted his family and murdered most of his family members. And recently on Sunday, Israel targeted his son and killed him alongside his colleague and friend who were both journalists as well. The number of murdered journalists in the Gaza Strip topped 120 journalists. Israel accused them of being Hamas affiliated journalists. Therefore, they say they're not journalists, we can kill them, and we are not responsible for their killing. Now, I want to give you a little bit context and a little bit background of Al Jazeera and where I stand from Al Jazeera, because it's important before we discuss the this particular person. My position is that Al Jazeera started in 1996 as a news outlet in the Arabic world, and it was unprecedented in the Arabic world to be a news outlet that hosts different types of guests, and there is a political discussion and debate among them. So it enriched the political environment and political climate and political culture in the Arab world. And people started thinking out of the box because most of the Arabic countries were under control of state media outlets. However, the Al Jazeera has never, for example, criticized the Qatari government and the Qatari ruling elite because it is based in Qatar and it is funded by the Qatari government and the Qatari royal family. Therefore, in the past years, there was always this discussion whether Al Jazeera is objective. And I'm being very honest with you. I followed Al Jazeera since I was a kid. I watched every news report, every news segment, every news bulletin, every report, every documentary. I spent most of my younger self watching Al Jazeera. I learned every background music, every news background music, everything. Al Jazeera was my entire existence. I wake up, for example, I go to school, I come back in the afternoon, and I watch Al Jazeera. I watch the news, I watch the documentaries, I watch the debates, and I was very excited about Al Jazeera because it enriched my political culture. And I learned a lot, for example, about the Lebanese civil war that nobody taught thought about it for me, for myself. I just heard about rumors from family members or from some of the people that I know, but I didn't know about it, let's say, comprehensively. And Al Jazeera provided brilliant journalistic work and documentaries about this case. And this was in 1996, right? In 2000, for example, Al Jazeera covered extensively the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon and how the resistance groups in southern Lebanon pushed the Israeli occupation forces out of the Lebanese borders, or most of it, and their reporting gained lots of they gave them lots of credibility and momentum among the Arabic people who were very excited about this victory against Israel, which was occupying southern Lebanon. And this continued till 2006. For example, 2006, when Israel again attacked Lebanon, Al Jazeera was reporting in Lebanon and showing this side of the story from Lebanon to the outside world. And therefore, the Israelis tried to target, let's say, the Al Jazeera journalists several times. Also, before that, in 2003, for example, in Iraq. In 2008, 2007, 2008, in the Gaza Strip, they reported extensively and they gained so much credibility because of that until the year late 2010 and 2011. Al Jazeera kept its reporting untouched about cases such as Palestine and Israel. However, they changed their entire editorial policy when it came to what is called the Arab Spring. Because in 2011, the United States, headed by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, they had in their minds a brilliant idea of what we say in Arabic, the Ikhwanization of the Middle East and North Africa. Ikhwanization means to support the political groups of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, and you saw the arrival of the Muslim Brotherhood in these countries. And in Syria was the same case when in 2011 the CIA engineered the what is called the Syrian Revolution, which is an insurgency against the government. the, Again, most of the groups active on the ground were from the Muslim Brotherhood groups. And Qatar, since it supports the Muslim Brotherhood groups, it saw, Doha saw that by supporting these Muslim Brotherhood groups in the region, regardless of who is their ally, for example, Bashar al Assad was their ally, right, in Doha. But regardless of that, they wanted to support the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, so that they create a long belt between North Africa and the Middle East of countries governed by the Muslim Brotherhood. And eventually, when that happens, Qatar and Turkey will have the upper hand over the entire Middle East and North Africa. This was the American strategy implemented and pursued and, let's say, headed by Qatar and Turkey. And if that happens, from their point of view, Qatar will overcome the influence of Saudi Arabia as well, because the Saudis do not like the Muslim Brotherhood. They were more on the side of the Salafists, or in Egypt, for example, they were on the side of Hosni Mubarak. And that's why, if you remember, in 2012 or 2013, there was a counter revolution this time supported by Saudi Arabia in Egypt, and Sisi removed Morsi from power, and Morsi died in prison. So if you see all these events happened in the Middle East, we come to the conclusion that Qatar was promised a bigger role in the region, and the United States tasked Qatar to overthrow or help in the overthrow of governments and what they called regimes in the region, and prop up and bring Muslim Brotherhood groups in these countries. And Al Jazeera played an instrumental role in giving the media support, the moral support, and the all type of support that they can bring in order to prop up these groups. For example, they used to host different religious clerics, sheikhs, imams, and all these sheikhs and imams, they were just giving fatwas to wage jihadi war against Gaddafi, against Bashar al-Assad. And they were giving what we say fatwas, which is like they're giving the permission to kill people if this killing would lead to the overthrow of the government. It was a shock for me personally when I saw what Al Jazeera is doing in Syria, because their reporting was consistent till excuse me. So their reporting was consistent till 2011, until the United States told Qatar that you can lead this, what they call the change and the Ikhwanization of the region. And their reporting in Syria was negating all the realities. Like, I was in Syria and many other people were in Syria. And they were telling, like, they were even orchestrating eyewitnesses, people who were not even in Syria, and talking to Al Jazeera as if they are in Syria, and they're saying that Assad has committed massacres here and there. And because of the previous reporting of Al Jazeera since 1996, that everybody created this image that Al Jazeera is credible, many people in Syria bought these rumors that Al Jazeera injected in this political climate in Syria, which led into this destruction half of the country. Al Jazeera supported Al Nusra Front, Al Qaeda's branch. They used to call ISIS, or we say in Arabic Daesh, they used to call it the Islamic State. So they gave even the linguistic legitimacy to these terrorist groups in Syria, right? Up until this moment, the only country in the region that is adamant and still insisting in removing Assad from power it is Qatar, which is very, very surprising to me. However, ask yourself this question: if Syria has had fallen in the hands of the American-led or American-sponsored so-called rebels, right? What would have happened to Lebanon? The first thing that these so called insurgents or rebels would have done to invade Lebanon and fight against Hezbollah and create a mayhem inside of Lebanon so that they create a situation that Hezbollah is busy with fighting against in a domestic war or in a civil war against these insurgents, right? And if that happened, and nowadays we are in 2024 and 2023, what would have happened to Palestine in the Gaza Strip, to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, if Hezbollah didn't intensify its retaliation or its shooting on Israeli forces in northern Israel? Because Hezbollah, what Hezbollah did, they created a situation in the north that Israeli most half of the Israeli army is now busy with dealing with Hezbollah instead of sending all their reinforcement to the Gaza Strip. So what Al Jazeera did in the past years, they actually served the interest of Israel in the region by destroying Syria, because Syria is one of the main sponsors, and through Syria a lots of weapons moved to Hezbollah, so they wanted to destroy that. So no weapons would reach to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And also, if Syria had fallen, just imagine this scenario: Qatar would have extended its gas pipelines to Europe, right? Through Syria, Turkey, and to Europe. And Turkey would have made billions of dollars, and Qatar would have made billions of dollars on the expense of the Russians, because Syria told Qatar. Qatar came in 2008, 2009, 2010 and proposed this gas pipeline through Syria to Europe and to Turkey and to Europe. And Syria said, no, I'm not going to stab my ally in, in the back. So I'm not going to betray my ally. And accordingly, Qatar turned its back to Syria. So this is all happened in the past years. Just to give you this context that is very, very important, right? However, are there any honest journalists in Al Jazeera? A lot. Most of them, probably. Are there good journalists? Are there investigative journalists? Of course, many of them, right? There are so many good journalists, good willing people with goodwill working for Al Jazeera. What I'm saying is this corruption in the administration doesn't necessarily mean it's reflected on the normal journalists. For example, one of these journalists who presented the point of view of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is Wael Dahdouh. And 3 4 weeks ago, the Israeli forces, they targeted his family and they killed his wife. I would just tell you how many people like Israeli forces killed from his family. So they killed his wife, two of his children, and his granddaughter. This was only a few weeks ago. And on Sunday, Israeli forces targeted and killed his son Hamza Dahdouh, the only remaining son of Al Jazeera's Wael Dahdouh in Gaza. I think this is unbearable pain and suffering, and I would like to dedicate this live streaming to him and to his suffering. And I want to shed light to this because it deserves to be spoken about. This guy has given a lot from his energy and from his soul to bring the voices of the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to the outside world. And this is from Al Jazeera. Hamza, son of Al Jazeera's Wael Dahdouh, killed in Israeli attack in Gaza. Hamza Dahdouh, the eldest son of Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief Wael Dahdouh, has been killed by an Israeli missile strike in the western part of Khan Yunis, Gaza. Journalist Mustafa Stureya was also killed in the attack when the vehicle they were traveling in near Al Mawasi, a supposedly safe area towards the southwest, was struck by the missile. A third passenger, Hazem Rajab, was seriously injured. According to reports from Al Jazeera correspondents, Hamza and Mustafa's vehicle was targeted as they were trying to interview civilians displaced by previous bombings. This is the son of Wael Dahdouh. He looks like his father, his face and his body posture. Hamza, 27 years old, was a journalist like his father. Mustafa was also in his 20s. Speaking from the cemetery where his son had been laid to rest, Wael seemed subdued yet resigned, saying he was one of the droves of people in Gaza today who are bidding bitter farewells to their loved ones every day. He vowed to remain on his path of showing the world what is happening in Gaza despite the pain of one loss after another. Hamza was everything to me, he said, the eldest boy. He was the soul of my soul. There are the tears. These are the tears of parting and loss, the tears of humanity, he said. I just want to show you this video from Al Jazeera when Dahdouh was farewelling his son.
الله يجزاك ابو حمزه. هذا اسعاف يمين وسع حط طريق حط برا ترولي.
Yeah, this is an unbearable pain and suffering, guys. Regardless of your opinion about Al Jazeera, this doesn't justify anything that is happening against their reporters in anywhere around the world. Reporters should be untouched. And this is targeted killing. Sorry. And I think the only reason why Israel hasn't killed yet Wael Dahdouh because of his popularity. And Mu'taz is the same. Mu'taz is another very famous journalist. Those are very, very famous nowadays. They have millions of followers. And I think that's the only reason why they didn't kill them, because the backlash will be very, very big. It's unjustifiable what's happening there. And when I write about these cases, to be honest with you, most of the people are good people. Most of the people are sympathetic with the Palestinians and what's happening in the Gaza Strip. However, there's sometimes some of the people also come and make stupid comments like and they justify this killing and put it on Hamas. I have no tolerance to these people anymore. I'm just blocking these people. I have no time to waste my time. If after since October 7th till today, if your opinion is still the same and you hadn't changed your opinion about this case and you think this is somehow a war against Hamas, then nobody can help you and you will need really serious help. And this is what I wrote just before I started my live streaming. I said, Israel has killed 200 Palestinians in Gaza per day. Like every day, 250 Palestinians are getting killed in the Gaza Strip since October 7, 2023. That's around 7,500 Palestinians per month. If we allow Israel to continue the onslaught in the next 12 months, the death toll will rise to 100,000 at the end of 2024. How can anyone still call this a war? This is something to consider. And I'm very bothered and I get sometimes frustrated by the journalists who show sympathy now with Wael Dahdouh, where they were the ones calling against ceasefire and saying ceasefire will help Hamas. And one of these people, I will show you, you know him very well, by the way, Jake Tapper, right? And he is just now trying to show sympathy, like as if nothing happened, as if he did nothing in this case. He says, Al Jazeera Gaza bureau chief Wael Dahdouh lost another son in an apparent Israeli airstrike that killed two journalists Sunday, months after his wife, two children, and grandchild were killed in a strike he himself reported on before he learned of their deaths. So he's speaking about this case. Okay, good. But who was the guy who was against ceasefire? Like, if there was a ceasefire now in Gaza, well, Dahdouh's entire family would have been alive, right? And we would have allowed for diplomacy to prevail and solve the conflict in the Gaza Strip through negotiations. But because nobody believes in negotiations in Tel Aviv, and they have mouthpieces around the world, and one of which this guy himself, Jake Tapper, whose video, this is his reportage on November the 8th, 2023, he was arguing against the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and the embassy of Israel to the United States, they were uh, applauding Jake Tapper, and they published his reportage to support their position that a ceasefire serves Hamas, and therefore we have to reject the ceasefire. Take a look.
The Biden administration would argue that a pause allowing innocent Palestinians to flee and allowing humanitarian supplies to get into Gaza, that's one thing, but that stopping the Israeli campaign against Hamas, which is what a ceasefire would be, stopping it would be another. Here's how former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton put it at an event at the Baker Institute.
People who are calling for a ceasefire now do not understand Hamas. That is not possible. It would be such a gift to Hamas because they would spend whatever time there was a ceasefire in effect rebuilding their armaments, creating stronger positions to be able to fend off an eventual assault by the Israelis.
So this is Jake Tapper. He's giving a platform to one of the most warmongers in the world, Hillary Clinton, who has caused unimaginable suffering and pain to millions of people around the world, one of which is my country, where she led the CIA regime change war operations, the covert operations in Syria. And remember what happened when Jake Sullivan was her advisor when she was Secretary of State. Jake Sullivan sent an email to Hillary Clinton telling her that Al Qaeda is on the side of the United States in Syria, and they have given no regard about that, right? And they have sent weapons and more weapons to Syria, which ended up all in the hands of these extremist groups in Syria. Now they call Hamas and ISIS. This is what they call, right? But in Syria, they were on the side of Al Qaeda and ISIS. They had a mutual enemy, and that was Assad. And when some of the elements of Hamas, because they are funded by Qatar, right? And when Qatar turned its back on Syria, some of the elements of Hamas, they also turned their back on Syria. And back then, Hamas was not ISIS in their eyes. And some of the elements of Hamas in Al Yarmouk camp in Damascus, they fought against the Syrian army, right? And I reported about these things extensively on Syriana Analysis. And from this ground, I was very critical of Hamas in the past decade, right? I'm no fan of Hamas. Everybody knows that. And because I was criticizing Hamas, many of the Israeli journalists started following me, state affiliated journalists, thinking that I'm one of these Syrian Christians or Christian Middle Easterners who would support Israel against their enemies. No, enemy of my enemy is not always my friend, my friend. Yeah, so it's incredible what is happening. And Dan Cohen, who is a Jewish journalist and activist, he is doing a brilliant job, actually. He's also doing a documentary now on the Zionists. He says the Israeli military murdered Wael Dahdouh's wife, two children, and grandchild on October 25th in what Israeli journalist Tzvi Yehitzkeli boasted was a targeted killing. Days later, Jake Tapper argued that Israel must reject ceasefire proposals and continue the slaughter. The Israeli government was so pleased with his explainer that it posted the segment to its social media platforms. Israel has since killed over 20,000 Palestinians, including, as Tapper notes, Wael Dahdouh's eldest son, Hamze. The blood of the Dahdouh family and thousands of their innocent victims is on your hands, Jake Tapper. I mean, I don't really agree that all the blood is in the hands of Jake Tapper himself, but of course he contributed in creating the narrative. He is a mouthpiece, right? What is the purpose of the CNN, guys? What is the purpose of these media outlets in the United States? Do you think it is to inform you or to shape your opinion? They're not telling you the news, they're telling you how to think about these cases. And because many of the Americans were fooled by these reports that the ceasefire will somehow help Hamas and not the Palestinians stuck in the Gaza Strip, now we have over how many? 32,000 killed in the Gaza Strip? It's 7,500 deaths Palestinians every month, guys. So do the math by yourself. And how many Israeli civilians were killed since October 7? None, right? And so this is not a war. This is just a one-sided bombardment and onslaught against the Palestinians of Gaza. Guys, before I continue, around 150 people are watching this live streaming. I would really appreciate it if you could please hit the like button, because when you do, this video starts, it gets boost, and it penetrates the algorithm of YouTube, and more people join the live streaming. And also, when the live streaming is over, more people can watch because it appears on their timeline. I would really appreciate it. Last time I asked you kindly, and you did, and it worked brilliantly. Thank you so much. Now, one of the people who is shedding crocodile tears now on this case is the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Antony Blinken, he says that the killing of the son of Al-Jazeera's Gaza bureau is an unimaginable tragedy. Take a look.
I am deeply, deeply sorry.
110 journalists being targeted by the IDF, including our colleague, son of our colleague, Mahmoud Wael Dahdouh, Hamza Wael Dahdouh. Is the United States condemn targeting journalists?
I am deeply, deeply sorry for the almost unimaginable loss suffered by your colleague, Wael Dahdouh. I'm a parent myself. I can't begin to imagine the horror that he's experienced, not once, but now twice. This is an unimaginable tragedy, and that's also been the case for, as I said, far too many innocent Palestinian men, women, and children.
Do you realize, guys, that he didn't even condemn Israel? Do you imagine if any other country and any other government killed over 110 journalists in any place in the world? One journalist, not 110, one, just one. Imagine now something is happening in Syria, and Syrian government bombs Idlib, and a US-sponsored journalist dies. And it happened, right? In Homs, for example, in 2012, one of the journalists who was carried by the so-called rebels to Homs, she got killed by Syrian army bombing against the rebels, and she died. And the entire, they almost called the UN Security Council, right, for her. And 110 journalists, it doesn't even equate to one condemnation. They're not even condemning, and they're shooting themselves in the leg, because, as you know, the South Africa is bringing the Israelis to the International Court of Justice, and the United States will be also held accountable for being complicit for what's happening there. If Israel is found guilty of committing a genocide in the Gaza Strip and violated the Genocide Convention, and if the ruling comes on the 11th and the 12th of this month that Israel is committing a genocide in the Gaza Strip and they call for a ceasefire, then the United States will be considered a complicit for helping Israel, first by providing the weapons and the bombs falling over the heads of the Palestinians, and two, for failing to condemn the killing, and three, to block the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. So the United States may be found also guilty of being a complicit in genocide if Israel is found guilty of genocide. Something that I think lots of people should think about, and especially in the United States. Your country might be complicit of committing a genocide. So think about that. What's going to happen? Do you think like the Court of Justice, International Court of Justice will be able to force the United States to follow its ruling? Of course not. The United States doesn't believe in international law and doesn't believe in the rules-based order. They just believe in the power. They just believe in power. They just believe in hegemony. They just believe in submission and subjugation. This is how the United States works, unfortunately. However, because the South African side has brought Israel to the court, it's important to check what are the motivations of the South African side. And this is a good article from The Guardian. He says, Chris McGreal, he says, how apartheid history shaped South Africa's genocide case against Israel. South Africa's lawsuit seeking a halt to the Israeli assault on Gaza in response to the Hamas cross border attack in October comes after years of deteriorating relations rooted in the ANC's decades long support for the Palestinian cause and the legacy of Israel's close military alliance with the apartheid regime during some of the most oppressive years of white rule. So, during the apartheid era, Israel was in alliance with the apartheid South Africa, something that is, oh my God, I'm so shocked of, right? The South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, told representatives of the Board of Deputies last month that his government would continue to support the Palestinians, quote, who have endured over 7 decades of apartheid type of brutal occupation. So, from the South African ANC's point of view, there are similarities between the Israeli apartheid, which they call it an apartheid, and the apartheid that they endured and they suffered under, right? So this is one of the reasons why the African country has initiated these proceedings against Israel in the International Court of Justice. Israel and apartheid era South Africa developed a close military alliance that included collaboration on nuclear weapons, even though many of the Afrikaner leaders of the time had a history of deep anti-Semitism. So they are giving here example of John Vorster, and John Vorster wasn't himself an anti-Semite, and he had anti-Jewish, let's say, rhetoric, and his sympathizers, they had fascist militia who used to attack against and burn Jewish-owned properties in South Africa. And despite that, the Israeli government back then had good relationship with him, and they even collaborated on nuclear weapons. And this raises the question, something that some people tell me, that whenever there is violence and attack against Jewish population in the diaspora, this is good news for the Zionist Israeli government. This is what they say. Because in their understanding or in their opinion, when there is a violence against any Jewish community in the diaspora, the Israeli government will present itself as the savior of the Jewish people and invite them, all the millions of them who live now abroad, to come and live in Israel and most probably over Palestinian territories in the settlements that they are constructing. After the ANC came to power in 1994, it established full diplomatic relations with Palestine, while ties with Israel deteriorated over time. The foreign ministry in Pretoria said it maintains only limited political and diplomatic interaction because of Israel's antagonistic attitude toward peace talks with the Palestinians and disregard for international law regarding the rights of the Palestinians and their territories. In 2019, South Africa downgraded its embassy in Tel Aviv to the status of a liaison office after the Israeli military killed more than 220 Palestinian protesters inside Gaza, mostly unarmed civilians, during months of protest. This is something to remember, guys, in 2019, because the Israeli side and its backers always say, oh my God, why the Palestinians only resorting to violence against us? Can't they resort to non-violent resistance, etc., etc.? You have heard that, right? And this is in 2019. I remember this incident on the fence between the Gaza Strip and the Israeli kibbutzes, unarmed Palestinians were protesting against the siege, against being in a almost a concentration camp. Right? They want to have normal lives, and they want for the occupation to lift the siege on them, and they allow them to have a port, to have an airport, to be allowed to travel, to go out and come in, but they are not allowed. And back then, the Palestinians were protesting peacefully, and the Israeli forces killed 220 Palestinian protesters inside Gaza. The vast majority, all of them were civilians. Many of them were journalists and medics, right? But people do not want to remember these things. As the Israeli assault on Gaza escalated in November, South Africa recalled its diplomats from Israel. The parliament in Cape Town passed a resolution calling on the government to shut the Israeli embassy and suspend diplomatic relations entirely until there was a ceasefire in Gaza and Israel committed to negotiating a just, sustainable, and lasting peace with the Palestinians. South Africa has also called on the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders for statements of genocidal intent and other alleged war crimes. Israel withdrew its ambassador from Pretoria amid the escalating diplomatic dispute. And this is something important to notice, that the International Criminal Court, they moved against Putin for moving children from war zones to Russia, and they call it a war crime and a crime against human. Oh, no, it's called a war crime according to the ICC, International Criminal Court. And when I asked the Alfred Desayas, the former senior UN expert, and he said the ICC has lost all legitimacy and they are under the influence and control of the United States. Like, I'm paraphrasing him, and he said they become a mockery because when they issue the arrest warrant against Putin for moving children from war zones to Russia, but not issuing arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu for actually murdering thousands of children in the Gaza Strip, right? That's why South Africa moved, like they asked the ICC to move to do something about it, and they didn't. Therefore, they moved to the International Court of Justice. Relations will not be improved by South Africa's choice of John Dugard to head its legal team at the ICJ, International Court of Justice. Why? Because Dugard served as the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in occupied Palestine during the 2000s. His reports accused Israel of constructing a system of Jewish domination over Palestinians, of violating the 1973 International Convention Against Apartheid, and of committing war crimes. He also accused the Israeli army of collaborating in settler terror against Palestinians. So the guy who is going to represent South Africa in the International Court of Justice, he was in the in the years of 2000s, he was the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in occupied Palestine. And his name is John Dugard. And John Dugard, back then, his reports accused Israel of constructing a system of Jewish domination over Palestinians, of violating the 1973 International Convention Against Apartheid, and committing war crimes. He also accused the Israeli army of collaborating with the settlers, the Zionist radical settlers, against the Palestinians. So, according to the author of the relationship between both sides will not see any improvement in the next period of time. I think this is a very, very important case. It is going to be held, as I mentioned, on the 11th and the 12th, so on Thursday and Friday. Let's see what is going to be the rulings and what time are they going to discuss these cases. I will watch it closely. And I will definitely either on Friday or Saturday host or make another live streaming about this case. Let's see, however, how is this ruling will be on Thursday and Friday. Now, one of the countries which is not really criticizing Israel also is Germany. And like, guys, I live in Germany. I'm not going to say much about this case, and you should understand my circumstances in this regard. However, Annalena Baerbock, she made a statement yesterday, and she said Israel can count on our staunch solidarity in the fight against blind terrorism. Rockets from Gaza continue to fly towards Israel. How many people killed these rockets? Miss Baerbock. Seriously, this is just a serious question. How many died in Israel now? Like none. And how many died in the Gaza Strip? Like seriously, the equating between both sides is just so annoying. So she says Israel can count on Germany's staunch solidarity. I understand that Germany will be on the side of Israel due to historical reasons and political reasons and other reasons. But you cannot equate between the rockets fired from the Gaza Strip, and I would want that to stop, of course. However, I want also for the butchering of the Palestinians to stop. And you cannot equate between them. Like 30,000 people, you cannot equate them with rockets falling now over Israeli territories that nobody has been harmed, right? So she says people continue worry about the fate of the hostages. They must all be released immediately. I agree. They have all must be released, but also the Palestinians must be released from the jails of the Israelis, over 5,000 of them. And then she wants to make it look like nice, right? And just like the Americans are trying to make it look nice, she says at the same time Israel must do more to protect civilians in Gaza. Israel needs to find a way to combat Hamas without causing harm to so many innocent people. This requires a less intense operational approach. The way Israel fights the war directly affects its own security. This is what she says. So I just want to draw parallels now. Imagine tomorrow the Syrian army says, I'm fed up. I want to wage a war against the largest safe haven for Al Qaeda terrorists in the world in Idlib, and I want to get rid of these terrorists from my territories. And I'm not equating between the terrorists in Idlib and the fighters in the Gaza Strip. Just don't misunderstand me. I'm trying to draw parallels between the if the Syrian army wages an operation, a military offensive against these actual terrorists in Idlib who decapitate people, and I can show you videos of them eating human organs, right? It's all documented. The acts of cannibalism, cooking people's Syrian army soldiers' heads on a barbecue. I've seen all these things, right? And it's there. However, if the Syrian army wages this offensive on the Gaza Strip and kills over 30,000 civilians, what do you think would happen to Syria? They will intervene to Syria, right? Security Council will come. If it fails, they will activate the responsibility to protect, and they will act even independently from the UN, right? Of course, the Syrian army is not going to kill 30,000 civilians because they know the death toll will be probably high. That's why they're postponing it, and they are trying to do limited targeted strikes against these terrorists, their military warehouses, against their production facilities, against their drone warehouses and their supply lines, etc., and their fortifications. They know that if the military operation would happen, probably a few hundred civilians will die because there is no, let's say, it's an urban area, and the militants and the civilians, they're all living together. So it will happen. That's why the Syrian army is not doing that. And also, there are all other considerations, such as the allies, right? Now, one of the countries that is accused of committing genocide, right, by the United States, Israel also, is China. They accused China in the past years of persecuting the Muslim communities in Xinjiang. And just for you to know, there are over 15,000 Uyghurs from China in Syria right now. Half of it are militants fighting against the Syrian army in Idlib, this place where I mentioned already, the largest safe haven of Al Qaeda terrorists. And China has a policy of de-radicalization of these people, and they send them to education centers, just like here in Germany, by the way, or in Netherlands or in Sweden. If somebody comes from ISIS camps in Syria and they know that this guy was ISIS, etc., they send him to de-radicalization centers. And some of these people who were radicalized in China by the CIA, by the Wahhabis, by the Muslim Brotherhood, to wage wars and create instability in China against the Chinese government, are being put in education centers. And these people, and this is considered genocide by the quote-unquote international community, aka the US-led jungle. And this is what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin says. Some countries are comfortable telling lies about Xinjiang, but ignore humanitarian tragedies in places like Gaza. Take a look.
国家热衷散布所谓新疆种族灭绝、强迫劳动的谎言谣言，却对加沙等地正在发生的人道惨剧视而不见，充分暴露了其虚伪的面目。国家热衷散布所谓新疆种族灭绝、强迫劳动的谎言谣言，却对加沙等地正在发生的人道惨剧视而不见，充分暴露了其虚伪的面目。
Yeah, they're exposing their hypocritical faces. But this is important statement coming from the spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, because if he is comparing or he's trying to say that this so-called rules-based order is hypocritical because they're not doing anything when it comes to the Gaza Strip, while they accuse China of committing a genocide, then he is indicating that what Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip is a genocide. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, just an interpretation that I get from this case. Now, I want to show you a few more things before we end this live streaming, which is we are around 200 people, guys. If you just joined this live streaming, I would really appreciate it if you could just hit the like button. It's for free, but it gives me very big support. Thank you so much. So this is coming from, guys, the New York Times. The New York Times, they say, from Lebanon to the Red Sea, a broader conflict with Iran looms. And now everybody is speaking about this case, and they're warning that probably a bigger war is on the horizon. And I truly don't know if this is the case, but there are increasing voices in the mainstream media, in the American press, are speaking about how the Biden administration is getting ready for a larger war in the region, that Israel is dragging the United States too. And this is an article by the New York Times. They say the obvious. They say, for example, American intelligence officials say Iran didn't instigate or approve the Hamas attack in Israel and probably was not even told about it. Hamas may have feared that word of the attack would leak from Iran, given how deeply Israeli and Western intelligence have penetrated the country. But as soon as the war against Hamas began, Iran's proxy forces went on the attack. I truly disagree with this notion. These people are not proxies, they're allies, and they don't understand the difference between an ally and a proxy, because the American mindset is always built and on they are the rulers and the rest are their proxies, right? And they project their worldview on other countries as well. Anyways, there were, however, significant indications that Iran, facing its own domestic problems, wanted to limit the conflict. Early on, Israel's war cabinet discussed a preemptive strike on Hezbollah in Lebanon, telling the Americans that an attack on Israel was imminent and part of an Iranian plan to go after Israel from all sides. Mr. Biden's aides pushed back, arguing that the Israeli assessment was wrong and deterred the Israeli strike. They believe they prevented or at least delayed a broader war. Yeah, that's correct. At the beginning of this, after October 7, when all these envoys and the foreign ministers came to the region and they spoke with different players in Jordan, in Egypt, and then they went to Lebanon and they sent the messages to Syria. Everybody told them the same thing. Just excuse me, I have to drink water. Everybody in this country told them the same thing. They're not interested in a wide war, and they're not going to initiate a regional war against Israel. And Biden administration believed this notion because Damascus, Tehran, Baghdad, Beirut, they all said, we're not going to initiate a war. Only if Israel attacks us, we will attack back. And we have no plan for an all-out war or a regional war. This is not in our interest. We want peace and stability to prevail now in the region, and the economies are suffering in these countries. And the Biden administration pushed back against the Israeli plan for preemptive attack against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yet, In recent days, the threat of a war with Hezbollah has resurfaced. The group fired scores of rockets at an Israeli military post on Friday and Saturday in what it called a preliminary response to the killing last week of a senior Hamas leader, Saleh al-Arouri, in Lebanon. What they don't say here is the target. The target was very important from the military perspective. They have targeted an aerial surveillance post in northern Israel, and therefore they partially or completely blinded Israeli intelligence from surveilling and watching their enemies and predicting attacks from southern Lebanon or from the Golan Heights on northern Israel. So the attack was strategically important from the point of view of Hezbollah, and they have carried out the attack successfully against these aerial surveillance posts in northern Israel. Some in the Israeli government, like Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, have warned that complacency about Hamas's intentions should not be replicated with Hezbollah, which is thought to have as many as 150,000 missiles aimed at Israel and has trained some of its troops, the Radwan Force, for a cross-border invasion. Like, it took the main American press 3 months to report about something that I was talking about since the beginning. And I said, Hezbollah is not Hamas, guys. They have over 100,000 soldiers and they have elite forces and they have precision missiles. And now they're speaking about this case in the New York Times. Therefore, in Washington, the concern now is less about a Hezbollah attack on Israel than an Israeli strike on Hezbollah. So this is the point, guys. The entire article, this is the main sentence that we have to focus on. In Washington, they know that Hezbollah is not going to attack Israel. They're not going to initiate a ground invasion, but they're scared and afraid and worried that Israel may attack Hezbollah, let's say, a big attack, not like assassinating one person here and there or bombing that is already happening. But if they open a big front against Hezbollah, then what's going to happen is a huge retaliation from Hezbollah, and this will drag the United States into war that the United States doesn't want to get involved, right? So the United States has told Israel that if Hezbollah comes over the border, Washington will support Israel, but not the other way around. So you see, this is the point, guys. Israel knows that if they open a front against Hezbollah, then their ally, the superpower, the United States, will get involved in this war because they are up until this moment unable to what they call crushing Hamas. Therefore, they will bring their ally to come on their side. And this is from the Telegraph just yesterday again. So we're linking these different reports and different analyses together. And now we have a confidential US report that says Israel unlikely to win against Hezbollah on second front. This is what I said from the beginning, guys. Israel is unlikely to win a war against the Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah. This is from the Telegraph, so just bear in mind the language. Israel is unlikely to win a war against the Lebanese Hezbollah if it decides to open a new front on its northern border, according to a confidential report by U.S. intelligence. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, found that the Israeli Defense Forces would be too stretched by fighting on two fronts, with the Air Force already overworked by constant raids on Gaza. Last week, Israel assassinated a senior Hamas official in a drone strike in Beirut, raising fears of a regional escalation. Hezbollah has since retaliated by launching at least 40 rockets into northern Israel. Amos Yadlin, a former IDF military intelligence chief, said on Sunday that Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, doesn't want another war, given Lebanon's fragility, but the IDF was preparing for a wider conflict with the Iran-backed group. You see, guys, this is really scary. It's really scary. And it will push the entire region into an Armageddon, and it will bring the United States, it will bring Iran, it will bring Syria. I truly do not understand. I truly do not understand how can anyone can support this. So the Amos Yadlin said Hezbollah cares about Lebanon. They don't want to see what is happening in Gaza to happen in Beirut. They don't want to see as the ones who destroyed Lebanon. And this is very correct. This is the internal consideration that I was telling you guys the other day. One of the main considerations why Hezbollah doesn't want to go to direct war against or open a large war against Israel. One of the consideration is the domestic problems that they have in Lebanon. The Lebanese economy is destroyed. The banking system has collapsed. Their port is destroyed. The currency is destroyed. The inflation is very high. And if there is a war, Israel will come and start bombing Beirut and destroy it. And the pro-American camp in Lebanon, they will blame Hezbollah for it. So they will not open a front against Israel. But if Israel opens a front against Hezbollah, then yes, they will intervene in this conflict with all their might. This is just my opinion. This is just my interpretation and analysis. That said, we have to be careful. We don't have the intelligence to read Hassan Nasrallah's thoughts. The IDF Northern Command is not basing its activities and deployment on the assumption that Hassan Nasrallah doesn't want war. Israeli officials have said that military escalation against Hezbollah is on the cards if negotiations over governance and security in southern Lebanon do not reach an acceptable agreement. Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, a IDF spokesman, said late on Saturday, quote, "We have a duty to defend our people, if not through diplomatic means, then through the force of arms. The diplomatic window may be short, but it is still open." Oh la la, I really don't know, guys. What do you think about this case? Do you think Israel will open a new front against Hezbollah and drag the United States into war? Let me know your opinions about this case. I wanna just show you one more thing before I finish this live streaming. And there was an interview by the BBC with a representative of the Houthis in Yemen. His name is Muhammad Ali Al-Houthi. He's from the Ansar Allah. He was on the BBC. And the interviewer, she asked him about why are they engaging in acts of hostilities against Israeli targets and Israeli cargo ships. And she asked him a funny question, to be honest here, and that's why I'm showing you this question, this video, and that is, you guys are far away from Israel. Why are you engaged in acts of hostilities against Israel? Take a look what he said. I will just bring him completely on the screen.
هل الاستخبارات الإيرانية تمدكم بهذه المعلومات؟
لا أعلم بذلك.
ولكن ما علاقتكم أنتم بما يحدث هناك؟ يعني أنتم على بعد أميال وأميال.
يعني أما بالنسبة لبايدن كان يعني هو جار نتنياهو، يسكنون في شقة واحدة، والرئيس الفرنسي أيضا يسكن في نفس الطابق، والرئيس الوزراء البريطاني يسكن في نفس العمارة، أم أن بينهم وبين الكيان المحتل آلاف الأميال؟
أجب على هذا السؤال. ما الذي حققه الحوثيون من كل ضرباتهم حتى الآن لربما 23 استهدافا؟ لم يحقق أي شيء، وكأنها جعجعة بلا طحين.
إذا فلماذا تدعي أمريكا إلى تحالف ضدنا ما دامه لا يحقق أي شيء؟
لم تحققوا أي أضرار لإسرائيل، لم يصبها أي نوع من أنواع الضرر، إذن هي جعجعة بلا طحين.
يعني على أي معلومات تستندين في أنه لم يصبها أي ضرر، وهم يشبه شلل تام للموانئ المحتلة في الأراضي الفلسطينية. أنت التي تجاجعين بأسئلتك بلا طحين، المفترض أن تعلمي بأن ما نقوم به هو دور مؤثر.
أنكم في الواقع إنما ترغبون في إحياء شعبيتكم الضعيفة في الداخل اليمني.
من يقول بأننا نريد من أجل شعبيتنا فليتفضل هو ليعزز شعبيته. من يتحدث بأنه لا توجد لدينا شرعية، لو كانت لا توجد لدينا شرعية لما استطعنا أن نواجه 17 دولة بما فيهم بريطانيا وأمريكا والسعودية والإمارات. لا زالت هذه النغمة لدى الBBC من 2015 وإلى اليوم، وهم يتحدثون بأنه لا يوجد لدينا شعبية. الشعب اليمني بأسره يقف معنا في هذه القضية، والشعب اليمني بأسره يقف معنا ضد العدوان.
هل أنتم قادرون على مجابهة رد إسرائيلي عنيف محتمل؟
اليد الإسرائيلية هي تصول في رؤوس إعلاميكم في الBBC التي تجعل من إسرائيل بعبع كبير وأنها الجيش الذي لا يقهر.
بدون شك. ألم يتم اغتيال رضي موسوي وصالح العروري؟
بالتأكيد، لكن لا يعني أن اغتيالهم أنها انتهت المقاومة، ولا يعني أن اغتيالهم أنها انتصار لإسرائيل، لأن الاغتيالات ليست دليل الشجاعة ولا دليل الإقدام، إنما دليل الجبن. أنت تعرفي بأنك لا تستطيع أن تقفي إلى جانب القضية الفلسطينية ولا تتحدثي بحرية عن الجانب الفلسطيني
الحوثيون
لأنه
لم
لديكم
ينفوا
الآن داخل
مسبقا.
بريطانيا.
So, just to paraphrase to you, one of the commentators said, can you paraphrase what he says? I can't read it because the subtitles are very quick, to be honest with you, but it's something I cannot control, unfortunately. So, first question was about why do you engage in acts of hostilities against Israel? You're far away from Palestine. And he was like, is Biden the neighbor of Netanyahu? Is the UK, France, and other countries are neighbors with Israel? Why are they engaged then in this conflict in Palestine, right? If Yemen is far away, then the United States is further, UK is further, France is further, and other countries are further away from Palestine. And the second question was, like your acts against Israel didn't cause any harm to Israeli interests, so why do you do it? And he said, if our acts didn't cause any harm to Israel, then why the United States is trying to form a military alliance against us? And the third question was, are you guys ready for if Israel retaliates against you and fights against the Yemenis and bombs you, are you ready for a harsh response? And he said, we have not, he didn't say we're not afraid, but he said the superiority of the Israeli army is only in your heads, in the BBC journalists, that Israel is not really, according to him, a superior army in the region. And finally, he said, do you dare to condemn Israel or criticize Israel on your channel? You don't have a you don't have the freedom in your channel to criticize Israel. You will lose your job if you criticize Israel. I think he's correct on the last one. Anyways, so what do you think, guys, about this case? Also about Al-Jazeera at the beginning, that I spoke about it extensively. I hope you liked it. I hope you appreciate it. If you do, please thumbs up, hit the like button before you leave this live streaming, and also probably if you want to share it with your friends, do it. And if you want to support my independent work, please become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, www.patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time, we will discuss with the Lebanese journalist Ghadi Francis about the Gaza war, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. She was in all these countries, reporting from Gaza, reporting from Yemen, reporting from Syria. So her insight is, in my opinion, very valuable. So tune in tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time, and I will see you tomorrow. Salam.